You guys ended up blowing up the castle he was hiding in, like actually blowing it up with
Well,
yes.
So technically, Hankerin blew up the castle. The rest
He
of us,
did.
the rest of us ran. Well, guys, if there's nothing else about the Arcane Library and about Kelsey for the moment, I want to transition to our hot topic of the day, which is we go behind the sheet. And the big topic today is, and to fill you in, Kelsey, last week Joe and I talked about building a character, and mostly at the character concept phase, like envisioning a character, looking at cool art, coming up with cool voices, and kind of walking around in your character's skin before you ever put pen to paper. This week I want to talk a little bit about your steps in making a character. And so I'm curious from both of you, what is your approach? What do you kind of focus on first?
Joe, I want to hear what you have to say first, because I wonder how similar we are.
Right. Yeah. Well, I did cover last time that I start with that, I look for that image, trying to like feel out who this person is. And I might throw some dialogue at like the windshield or into a mirror or something, like thinking about that. But when I get into like putting the stats down, like when the paper comes out and I write down, like Rongar, Goblin Pit Fighter. Like, when I have that idea of who they are, I kind of like, I almost have two different approaches on where I start when I start putting that pen down and writing things out. If I go to the stats, and it's weird, I'll start at the stats because I write my character sheets out by hand. So in the effort to not smear my ink, I will start at the top with the name, and I will literally work my way down, filling everything out. So like my very next step, like I put my name in, I'll put in, a little controversial. My backstory is usually one sentence, maybe two. And then I move on to my stats because that's the next thing on the line. Sometimes I'll have an idea of like, oh, I want them to be strong. Like with Rongar, I wanted him to have like some muscle for a little tiny goblin. But I didn't want to dump all of my points straight into it. Like, because I wanted, a fighter, I figured he should also be a little tough. Maybe he's perceptive. Maybe I want him to have charisma, but more in the sense of like he's not charming, but maybe he's scary-ish. So like I'll go into that when I'm thinking about my stats. The other approach, and one I also love equally, is like I won't even pick what my stats are. I'll just grab a handful of D6, 6d6, and roll them, and whatever number they land, I count down which stat that is and just fill it in. Because ultimately, I don't necessarily think that the stats really have anything to do with who the character is. I mean, yeah, it makes more sense if your fighter is big and bulky, but why couldn't your mage like be able to take off the robes and just be like Conan underneath and like, Bahrusha, and throw out this spell, and oh darn, my magic's not working. I'm going to hit him with my staff like a baseball bat because I'm built like freaking, famous baseball player.
Right. I'm like,
Bo Jackson, is he still a thing? I remember Bo knows baseball. I don't know. But I kind of have like a 50-50 approach. Sometimes I'll focus on picking what those stats are and what my effort is going to be, or my categories. But then other times I'm just like, you know what? I want random. I want to see where the dice are going to help me get to this, because ultimately the character is going to play the same way. That idea I already have in my mind, like the stats and those dice rolls that are going to come up in the game are almost less important for me, I guess, in a weird way.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's kind of like my steps when I really start getting into that putting pen to paper, when I pick that sheet up or when I start writing that character sheet.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah,
I love that you like laser print like the line by line instead of just like
Yeah.
stats and
Yep.
then like
Oh yeah, like I'm flipping back through to see where do I
Gotta do this,
Do I
and then
have
I gotta do
somebody?
this,
Oh.
and then I'm gonna do this.
right. It's like very like down the line methodical.
Well, and-
I like that.
Blast from the past. I'm sure you guys remember Bulger.
Yep.
First thing it started, like I started at the top with his name, Bulger. Bulger Gulgin was the last name. Brawler, Cook. My backwatch or my whole backstory, quartermaster of the North Watch. That was all I had for backstory. That was it. That's it.
Yeah.
And then I go to the next slide. Like I got to write these out and then write them in so that I don't smear the ink because I use pen. I'm a crazy heathen that's like pen, which is why my hit points look like that. Which is why all of my equipment looks like this with scribbled out everywhere.
With
Beep.
stuff scribbled out.
Stuff. Yeah, so that's just how I like to do it. I like the feel of a pen. I like the scratch. So like I guess I take some tactile sensation in when I do a character.
For sure. I
my
definitely
hand.
prefer that for like the handwriting it out. I've done like, computer stuff for ease of access, but there's nothing like just taking a blank sheet. Not even like a pre-made character sheet, just taking a blank sheet of paper and making your own character sheet. That's by far my favorite way to go. And like we have similarities, Joe. I think our dwarves from the North Watch, like that group of characters we made is a prime example of my favorite way to make a character, which we kind of touched on earlier, that developed completely out of like a preliminary role-playing session where we came onto a scene. Like, and I think that the if someone were to replicate this, you want like a tentpole character. Like you want someone to come in with a relatively strong concept of their own character, and they're sort of the catalyst. So I think in this case, it was like you and Hankerin both had these characters that you had a kind of more clear idea of who you were. And you guys started us off by role-playing a scene together where we were in our fortress and you guys were kind of having your back and forth where we established more of who you were. We figured out that you were the older uncle because Hankerin called you uncle, like.
Yep.
And then like I came into that with no concept, right? Like I had no idea who I was going to be. And I kind of saw the gap in what we didn't have, where I was like, okay, maybe we need like the younger, like maybe more silly or playful dwarf, or the more unusual. So then I was like, Styx is the younger sister who's more of a thief type, who's actually kind of acrobatic for a rogue, and she's a little bit more and maybe impulsive and like maybe silly or juvenile because she was the young one. And so that's where she came from, right? And that's probably my favorite way to make a character where the backstory is very simple. Like, a member of the North Watch, the youngest sister, that was her backstory. Right. And then that leaves so much room, to grow the stories together. Even just by throwing out one word, like the fact that Hankerin called you uncle, that established us as a family. Yeah. Just that,
That's also why, cycle back. That's why the last name is written in so small, because all I had written was Bulger, Brawler, Cook. And I didn't have enough space when Brandon or Hankerin, when he said, oh, it's my uncle, we're Gulgins. And I went, oh, okay, I got to write that in. Gulgin's the last name.
Yeah. And we've done this before too. Like I remember, Alex, when we were talking about the White Elk, like Blood and Snow game, my character came in when you guys had already been playing for a bit, right? And I was a little worried about this because I came in playing a tribe, like the head of a tribe, Una, and but you guys like gave me free reign to start to build my backstory. I had no like super long backstory for her except knowing that she was the head of a tribe, and then you guys let me basically just be like, our tribe, the White Elk, is this way and that way. And like right from the start, we had this collaborative story building that came up organically, right? And so that's not always easy, right? You don't always have that luxury when you're designing a character. So if I don't get to do that, if we don't have this, generative process at the beginning, I love to go full random, like fully random, where if I know I'm not filling a gap and we're not role playing something. Yeah.
That's so surprising.
Random.
I know.
Random wins.
I don't get to do it often either, right? Because usually I think we're doing a session 0 as we're developing our story, which is for sure my preferred way. But when we don't do that, or when I'm like playing a one shot or something, it used to be, maybe we all experienced this when we were younger, that like at first your D&D characters are an in-world avatar of you. They're your Mary Sue, they're you, right? And like you want them to be like you and be the heroic version of you and the cool version of you, with 2 scimitars and a cat that's a panther. And,
yeah, right.
yeah, right. And then like I think as we grow as gamers, we realize that there's so much fun in the in emergent play and characters, and being like, oh, this is a surprise, combo of race, class, and randomly rolled like job or backstory that makes this character I would never have thought of. And I really enjoy that aspect now. So I will go full random if I can.
Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah, there's an inherent fun with that randomness. When you get the fighter who is clumsy.
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
Right.
It adds like extra beats and extra moments. Or the fighter who is just weak as hell, like built like me, like with this skinniness. It's like, but you can like
You're
hold
not
his own
that
somehow.
Yeah. It's fun. The wizard who's terrible at casting spells.
I'm a little
like,
people. Come on now.
Yes. Yes.
That's how I got one character, a goblin knight, who was actually kind of noble, was Tark. And
Oh my god, Tark was amazing.
Was so fun. The only thing I knew about him was he had to be another lighthearted character because we had a really tragic character death. And I was like, I want to bring someone in who's a little bit more fun and lighthearted and cavalier. And that was all I knew about him. And like a goblin knight, like where does that come from? It kind of came from a mixture of randomness and just a slight direction of vibe. So
with the raptor mount Julieta. Oh man, it was so wonderful.
She was so fun. He was like this Shakespearean, like romantic goblin in armor with this like noble bearing, and he rode around on a velociraptor who was like his beloved mount, you know? Yeah.
Right. Take Cyrano de Bergerac, put him in plate armor, riding a dinosaur, and make him a knight of the Goblin Empire.
Yeah.
I loved him.
Epic. Well, I have to say, guys, so I agree with Kelsey. If you have a tight-knit group of friends and you've played together for a long time, and whether you do it over Discord or even you just get together over a bowl of Cheetos, right, it's amazing to try out some early RP and just see what fits with the full understanding, hey, we could retcon some of this. Like, if it doesn't jive, like, create a safe space. Or again, back to what I was talking about last week about, stepping in your character's shoes, zipping up the character's skin, walking around in them and trying it out. Like test driving a car. Let me test drive this character in a safe space, a safe creative space. Try out some of these one-liners I've been working on and see if it works. Try out some of these phrases. See how they meld with the other characters and see what you get back. And then kind of like, the best of improv, like yes and, kind of build on what some of the other folks give you that we've been talking about. I love that way to generate characters. And frankly, if I could do that every time, I would do that every time.
Right.
And I think it was Hankerin who decided that I was a lizard man who got pulled out of the sea.
Yes.
Which
was awesome.
And then I just went with it. Like yes, okay. Then who is this guy? And by trying out lines and talking, actually speaking with the other characters, that I figure out sort of who Vlass is. Oh, he's running from something. God, what was he running from? Like those sorts of things. I will tell you, if I don't have that luxury, generally my process after I've looked at some cool art, after I've tried out some funny voices in the car, usually, my approach is then I'm going to start looking at probably abilities, because at that point I probably have a sense of who that character is in terms of a human being, or in terms of their bioform or life form. Then I'm going to try to start look at some synergies, whether that's loot or ability or milestones, like what does this character have that they bring to the table that can be useful to the group. And I'm almost always looking for maybe an item or two that kind of work together. So I start there, and then stats for me are the last thing. Like usually for me, the stats are the piece that's cemented. And so for folks who are coming from a background where they don't play ICRPG, one of the beauties of ICRPG is you get to assign and place and choose, and there's so much choice among all the loot and milestones and abilities that are out there. I love that sort of config, like Tinker Toys, or even a more advanced like set where you can kind of build your synergy.
It's like a slide puzzle. Like somewhere in there is a character, you're just
that's it.
You're sliding the tiles around until you're like, oh, that's what they look like. That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, like what if this guy's a poisoner kit? And I'm like, no, that doesn't really fit. I cross that out. And then I'll try, I'll plug in another piece of loot or another, milestone or another ability.
The poisoner kit is a toad that he keeps on his head underneath the ratty top hat he found in the dumpster.
Yeah, I actually did build that character, my goblin Keck, he's super childlike. He only says one or two words, usually his name, Keck, which he repeats over and over and over again. And my loot, Kelsey, was a set of children's blocks that he uses to climb to get into places. It's his makeshift ladder. A lady's hairpin that he uses to pick locks, and a chicken. And the chicken is usually how he ferrets out traps. Like he'll send the chicken ahead.
So creative.
Right? And then he has this poison toad that he keeps under his top hat that he slathers onto his blade from time to time.
Right. So awesome. I love it.
I love that character.
And notice, just talking through all that fun stuff, all of that came first, and then I went back and statted Keck, and I went, hey, you know what? He probably needs to have some dex. Because he's going to be balanced on one toe on this tower of children's blocks. Like, he probably needs to not fall off. Right. So, and then I was like, well, and then probably he's probably not very strong, but maybe, he's going to have some wisdom about him because he's going to notice stuff. So I'm going to give him sort of that piece. And then I also settled on the really fun part about Keck is he took the old school greedy gloves, where every time you open loot, you get a second free piece of loot. Only I self-nerfed and said that second loot had to come from the bizarre loot table.
Yeah.
So what's cool about Keck is, he grabs these weird random items and he's hoarding them in his little sack, and I'll tell you how great it is in the moment to pull out some weird item and have that be the thing that helps save the party.
Awesome.
And none of that came from stats. And then I would just say, because Joe touched on this from a controversial question. Backstory or no backstory? Because for me, I never write a backstory. At least not the long, flowy,
Before we even get into the backstories, let me tell you about my fighter. 14 years ago, when he was but a lad, with a broken shovel, I slew a dragon.
Stop. Get out. Get out of my game right now. You're out of here.
Yeah. That's all I gotta say about backstories. Like,
well,
come on now. Your first level character ain't fought no damn dragon.
That is so. I've always been baffled by that. Like, yeah.
And no offense, or maybe just a little bit of offense to the people who have these backstories where they talk about all these great deeds that they did for their level 1 character. Like, boy, you just left the farm. You didn't do nothing.
Well, yes, and what I would say to folks, if that's your first impulse, my invitation would be play to find out who your character is. Create the legend of your character through his or her actions in the game. And in effect, then you've written the story of your character. And let it be a journey of self-discovery instead of trying to front load what you think are all these amazing events. Because the reality is, to me, if a player comes to me like that, that's a little bit of a turnoff. Like almost immediately that they have such a clear vision. I would much rather want to know what your motivation is as a character. Like, what are you looking for? Like what are you seeking?
Right.
That to me is more important. And then as a DM, I love that. Like, oh, so and so is seeking the sword of his or her ancestors. Like, oh. Now I also have something to work with as a DM. What do you guys think? And I know that's a bit of a controversial topic because there are people who will write 7 pages and who will kill or die if you try to pry it from their hands. So,
Yeah, I think that the 7-page backstory is like more and more frowned upon as a whole, I think, in the system. Like it's because if it were up to me and outside of like the emergent backstory that we can make sometimes when we have the luxury, which it is, of getting to plan our party together that way, if we don't have that, then I would almost say like no backstory is better than some, or just like the simplest thing, like like the queen sent me. Like that's
Yeah.
still a special backstory, but it doesn't mean like you're a dragon slayer or whatever. Like just something so simple that you can build on, because
Yes.
isn't the whole point becoming a hero, not starting as one? Or
Right.
having heroic tendencies is important, but like you're playing to find out why you're special. So
Yeah.
you don't want to come in already being cooler than you could ever achieve in the game.
Right.
Yes, or do it in a way, right, that doesn't sort of take away from the other players in a way that sort of cheapens
Hmm.
them. So one of the things that I would say is like my guy Gil Sunder. I
Yes.
wanted him to be like a holy knight, which is pretty darn cool. So I just said that. That's his past. Gil Sunder, Holy Knight of Grey. But then I took the next step, which I think is the most important step, what he's after. And I said he's on a quest to find his brother's killer. Like, boom. So he was this knight, but now, in the present, which I think is more important, and then what he's seeking in the future, I think those things are vastly more important than here's all the stuff he did in the service of King Henrik. Like, who knows what he did? Okay, right? He was probably pretty cool. But now, let's pick him up at this moment in time and see.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, like Abe Orchard from the Demonlands games. Alex, more Demonlands. Oh, sorry. Had something stuck in my throat.
Only because into the TPK. Only cuz.
No, because it's awesome. But Abe Orchard, like the whole backstory, and again, Kelsey, you had touched on it. Alex, you had also talked about it. Like there was a little role play that we were just chatting away in Discord, and this little role play bit came up where we were in a tavern, and it was like kind of figuring out who everybody was, and Abe Orchard kind of picked the last name Orchard because, well, he's a farmhand, or he was his whole family, they ran an apple orchard. And like that was his whole backstory. He was a kid, like 19-year-old kid who left the farm with just a wood cutting axe. And he wanted to see the world that he had only like read about and heard about from bards that passed through. Like he had no clue. He was a little bit, naive, but like his whole backstory was he wanted to see the world. He wanted to travel and see if it was true, what was out there. And he left home with a woodcutter's axe. That was his whole bit. And I freaking love that character.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Poor little
memorable.
Abe Orchard. Dolgan, hurry, we have to move.
So memorable.
Well,
Well,
great.
Kelsey, I feel like we have kept you a ton. Are you still fine if we transition to our next segment,
Yeah,
which is
totally.
going behind the screen? Are you cool with that? Do you still have a few more minutes to hang out with us?
I have a lot of time. My book's written, Alex. It's done. So
Oh, I love that answer. All right, so let's go behind the screen.
Bum, bum.
All right, so a lot of people want to know, particularly if they're brand new game masters, how do you start a campaign? Where do you start? And both of you are super experienced, so I'm just curious and where you begin. And I think as a corollary to that, what I want to ask, just sort of a surprise topic for me, what are DM's responsibilities? So I was thinking about this week, like let's kind of roll back a minute. What are you even about as a DM? What's within the orbit in the ambit of your previews here? So, Kelsey, what's your take? What are DM's responsibilities, and then how do you even go about starting a campaign?
yeah, I want to start with the responsibilities because that plays into this. Like, I think like boiled down to its core, a DM's responsibilities is to present meaningful challenges. And that's definitely, there's a lot to being a DM that we all know there's a lot. And at the end of the day, I think you're succeeding if you are constantly putting your characters into confrontations or challenges or giving them something to overcome that's pushing them forward, and it doesn't even have to be in a given direction. Like, a lot of times the direction will naturally emerge as you're giving them things to overcome that just make sense for the environment that they're in. They're in a forest. Well, maybe they have to cross a river. Maybe they have to defeat a troll. Like, maybe they have to go into a ruin that they come across. So, like, contextually, as long as it makes sense, that's kind of what your ultimate goal is. And so when we're talking about how to spiral that out into a campaign, I'm not sure there's one exact way to start a campaign. I haven't ever had it be an exact same process each time, but you always start with the players and you kind of get a vibe for, generally speaking, what they want the tone of the world to be. Like, are we talking fantasy? Are we talking cyberpunk?
Right.
And then once you've identified that, it's a little bit of, and what are your characters' broad roles in that world going to be? Like, are you guys good guys? Are you all hunting for something? Are you guys law-breaking hackers who need to get to the moon to end a mega AI, which may or may not have happened to us.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I know. Seriously, one of the best campaigns of all time that Alex ran. It was an altered state game with that as the premise. And once you kind of have those two things pinned down, then it becomes about, well, then what's the first challenge? Now your job as the DM is, how are you going to create a barrier to a general goal that the characters are pursuing right from the start. And the barrier only should be at the ground level, because the characters are operating at the ground level. So what are you going to put in front of them that is tangible and immediate? And then after that challenge is done, contextually, what's the next thing? What's next? Where did that leave them, and what challenge can you find between that and their next, objective or path forward, or whatever direction they tell you or show you they're moving in? That's where you place the problems.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and as a strong writer, Kelsey, that's just putting obstacles in front of people. That's just good drama. Like, we don't care about characters one iota unless they struggle, right? Mm-hmm. And I will say, I think that is one of the hardest parts of the DM, is to put challenges in front of players that don't completely destroy them, but that do challenge them in a meaningful way, and that then ultimately they can overcome and feel that sense of relief and resolution, and then continuing to rinse and repeat. Mm-hmm. Because I will say, if you study fiction writing, one of the nuggets that I took away is that all of drama, all of the master plots can really be boiled down into one. And that is, Joe gets his ass caught in a bear trap and struggles like hell to get out. And I think if you keep that in mind, that what we really want to focus on is the struggle, that's what becomes interesting. That's what becomes, enjoyable. That really is a key part of a DM's responsibilities. For sure. Mm-hmm. Sorry, didn't mean to steal your thunder there, but
no, you recapped it so nicely. That's the core of what I think about it, right? It's that conflict, meaningful conflict.
I agree. Awesome. Joe, if you're a swig of Pepsi there, now that you're lubricated to expound on this topic, how do you start a campaign? And maybe even before that, what are the DM's responsibilities?
Yeah. So, obviously, I did catch, there's the whole dramatic and danger-filled bit. And I just want to touch on that real quick, because that's what I ran for. I heard the unmistakable sounds of what I thought was dog vomiting. It was not.
Drama.
Yeah, there was drama.
Instantly fascinating.
The what? I had to run. So apologies for that. There was some panic, but it was nothing. Just, I don't know, coughing, maybe had a hair in his throat. I don't know, but there's nothing on the floor. So
hope he's okay.
Oh yeah, he's fine. But anyway, GM responsibilities. Man. Well, I mean, first and foremost is, like, I think the facilitation of fun. Not that you have to force fun or anything, because when you're at a group, when you're at a table, it's a whole lot easier with friends. But even when you're, like at a convention, running a game for strangers, or at your local game shop, I think the prospect of including everybody into this fun and going along with, I think to an extent, going along with their version of fun and adopting that, I think is probably one of the most key responsibilities. Also, like, kind of making sure it's safe for everybody. You don't want. I've had some doozies of games with strangers.
Yeah.
With, I mean, there's only been 2 instances I had to stop the game and kick somebody the hell out of my table because I will not stand for that garbage. But that safe space, you want everybody to be comfortable. So I kind of think those are like the key tantamount bits, which all kind of directly flow right into like building that adventure and bringing that peril. And I'm sure like you guys are probably in that very similar thing of that moral dilemma, as Ingrid Bernal always tells us. Like you want there to be something for them to care about, something to allow them to be heroic. Like I think those are kind of those responsibilities. And kind of on that note, some of the first steps I take when prepping for a new campaign, like I'm a almost like maybe a little odd duck in this. Like I like to have a title. Like I like to have just a title, whether it's like punchy or
that's good,
a little mysterious. Yeah. I work best when I have a title that kind of like zeroes my focus on what I'm looking for. Like the adventure that we were talking about that we kind of kicked off at the beginning, the one I just ran for the Moldy Guys. The title I have on that is The Fabled 9 Treasures. I had no idea what the heck that meant, but I was like, what are the Fabled 9 Treasures? I don't know. Apparently it was a compass, was the first one.
What does the delving mean to you?
Exactly. The delving.
Yes.
The delving, right?
Another example, yeah.
It kind of it starts that focus off. It kind of gets you a bit in there. I think on the title screen I actually had a different thing, and that was going off what you guys had said. The DDS, Devil's Detectives Agency. But anyway, yeah. Like so, I'll get that title, and then I just kind of start brainstorming, like what cool things could be a danger or a threat to kick this off. Like I don't focus on where are they starting or any of this, because I'm sure we'll figure that just talking with the players. But as a game master, for me, I get my title, and then I start thinking of, writing down what things of peril are there. Is it, does a fire break out? Like burning in New Haven, I got to cite that. Do you walk into town and there's like this 6-year-old girl tied to a stake that the witch hunters are about to set on fire? There's these things. Do you wake up prisoners of Moloch? Do you wake up underground in a cage with nothing, wondering what's going on here? How do I get out of this? Like you need that initial hook, that initial sense of peril and dread.
Yep.
I think as really kind of those first steps, because the location is generally secondary. Like whether it's a tavern or a cave or the wilderness, any of these things can kind of fit into that. You could be a prisoner in a tavern. You could be in the middle of the wilderness and this fire breaks out. Just to kind of touch those two things, like there's just like little bits where, it's more fluid on where they start. But those hooks, I think, are the big things for me. Like that's where I start my focus. I don't even think about monsters or generally even who a big bad is going to be at the end. Like I'll worry about that later. It began small.
That's awesome.
Is probably the best way.
That's awesome. Well, guys.
That's what I got. What about you?
Man, you guys are all over it here. I'm going to tell you, I sort of made this little quick list here. In terms of DM responsibilities, like I think there are some practical ones. So I think initially, you have to describe the world. At some level, you have to provide some description of the world. Whether it's a discrete beat, I don't think, by the way, you should design the whole world. I think that's way too much work. You don't have enough mental lift. It's a bunch of folly. It'll never get used anyway. but you have to describe the world. You have to put forward the plot and the plot hooks like Joe was talking about, especially the initial one to get everybody going and kind of gelling together. You have to, although not every game does this, but to some degree, utilize the character backgrounds and motivations and maybe try to weave them into the world to a degree. You have to voice, by the way, all of the non-player characters. Like, every character who isn't a PC, you're responsible for bringing to life. That's a pretty big one. You have to breathe life into all the monsters. And you have to put all those obstacles and all the peril in front of players. And, by the way, determine the difficulty and the challenge at every step. Like, that's a tall order. When you, like, all the encounters, all the challenges, that's a tall order when you think about all, and that's all practical stuff that you have to do and are responsible for. But I would like to talk a minute, and I think it's often overlooked, about the intangibles. So, to me, one of your biggest responsibilities as a DM, as Joe alluded to, Kelsey, you alluded to, you're responsible for other people's enjoyment.
Yeah.
Like, to me, that intangible is your most precious baby that you should be guarding from the jump. And I would argue some of the other intangibles too, like morale. Like, you don't want to kill off new characters in the first session. Like, you know, if you can help it, but you really want to try not to do that. Like, you don't want to kill morale. You don't want to take away players' agency. You know, like, you don't want to put them, like Joe's talking about, in situations that would violate trust or take advantage of your players. Like, you're responsible for momentum in terms of, like, energy level, excitement, that sort of thing. And I would say, you know, we've talked...
Which I think, I hate to interrupt, the energy level, I think that touches back to voicing all the NPCs and making the monsters livable.
Absolutely.
There's that. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And those are the ways, like, you build trust with people, right? By taking care of them and managing those intangibles. Momentum, morale, trust, all sorts of things. And I would just say, by the way, we talk all the time about why we get along so well, and you know, and why, you know, we all sort of take care of each other as friends. The other thing that I would note is that we're all dog owners. And I would just say, if you are responsible for other human life, or not human, but other life that you help take care of, I suspect in terms of your empathy and your service and your willing to take care of someone other than yourself, that those are the best traits for a game master in terms of your responsibility. If anything, I would say focus on all that stuff. And then the other things fall into place. Now,
That's
you just came in all
true.
deep.
I think I could be wrong.
That's a big one. Oh my gosh,
Empathy, huge.
like almost like you got to treat your players like they're your puppies. Like, you want to give them the best you have. You want them to have fun. You safeguard their experience because you cherish them.
That's it.
I mean, that's how I treat my puppies.
That's it.
And you don't want to punish them if they accidentally pee on the rug. They didn't do it on purpose. They feel bad. Don't get out the newspaper.
They didn't plan that.
Tell them it's cool and run them outside and clean it up.
That's my hot take.
Them? Yeah.
That's my hot take. Yes. You reward the behaviors you want to see, and then, you know, God forbid if you have behaviors at your table that you don't want to see, then you address it right away, immediately in the moment.
Yeah.
Right?
And you're guiding them.
Bad,
right.
But don't punish them for mistakes.
Correct.
Exactly.
And that's how you build trust. I think, and to me, that's the most important thing. Now, in terms of my approach for the practical side to start a campaign, I'm just going to say real quick, I use what I call the poltergeist method. I didn't coin that. Believe it or not, Xander coined that. It's the poltergeist method. But if you think about how a poltergeist operates, like, you don't see the big bad right out of the jump. I always try to think, what does the big bad look like down in the basement, down in the dungeon? I envision that first, and then I reverse engineer. So
you see the stack of chairs and go, what the hell is going on?
Well,
here?
right. So in the beginning of a campaign, players are going to hear some chains rattle, right? But, you know, it's a little bit suspicious. And then they're going to see some chairs and some books stacked real weird, right? And then as the campaign continues to unfold, like, they might hear some strange things. And then they might have a small encounter with the big bad, but it's not the final confrontation. And it all leads to hunting down the big bad in the basement, in the scary place, and then trying to vanquish and overcome. To me, that is a very simple, practical approach, like an arc, and that's how I plan. I start with the end in mind. What does the final encounter look like? And then I work back to what you're talking about, Joe. Then what is the beginning plot hook that's going to propel these players and these folks that I care about, into some really cool events. And then you can build branches off of that. But that's the basic skeleton.
I love that. I feel like this has been, because we've kind of gone from high level where we're like challenges that are meaningful, but then we've gone on to define actually like concretely what that means here. Like, with like Joe explaining. And I think one big thing was making sure that you're giving an experience to each person and that it's a safe space. And then like Alex talking about the actual concrete steps for taking them from knowing they have a challenge they need to overcome, but then how you actually play that out, So like it's I feel like this could become like an article unto itself explaining like the funnel down to campaign,
Well, you know what, Kelsey? Because we need some refinement on this show. We're more than willing to have you back anytime to help expound on some of these concepts. Like, I know, like, people don't want to hear from Joe and me. They want to hear from you.
No, I want to hear from both of you because I know you guys are masters of the craft.
No,
like,
we're not.
Very few exist.
No, you are.
I'm master of the silly voices. I think there was like a misread somewhere in there. Like, I do the silly voices. Master of the craft, I leave that to you guys.
It's a think tank situation because I don't think any of us could come in here with like the exact answer to any of these problems. I feel like these discussions make us consider more of what's involved and kind of solidify our own practices,
Absolutely.
Oh, this just popped in my head. One of the reasons that we've all gamed together a lot and we've all just had absolutely amazing games. We've talked about games that each of you guys have run that were just mind-blowing. Part of that is because we're all very malleable and accepting of what the others are doing, which I think touches right back to the trust. But I think also that comes back to what one of the GM responsibilities should be. You need to be malleable. Like you need to be able to accept, I think you had touched on it, Kelsey, and Alex, with bringing some of the backstory back in. That's part of that being malleable. Like you have your idea, this is what my adventure is going to be.
Right.
This is how I'm changing it to fit so that my players have a better inclusion and get more spotlight because that person who killed your brother, Gilsunder, he's over in this next town. You found clues to reach that. They're there. Like, things like that. Like, those are the things you need to, as a game master, one of those responsibilities is being malleable, being willing to change to fit in. You're not just a square peg for a square hole. You're liquid, and you are going to fill the vessel that needs to be filled at the time.
Yep.
Sorry, it just popped in my head.
No, man.
It's very Bruce Lee.
It's epic, dude. That was epic.
One must be like water.
So, guys, it's crazy. We've been talking for almost 2 hours. We've covered a ton of ground.
We could talk for hours more.
Literally.
Well, yeah, literally on the topic of DMing or playing alone. Absolutely. Best moments.
Like, I could just lean back and listen to the two of you go.
I'm just going to have Kelsey back. We'll just have to have Kelsey back.
I would love to come back. This is like the most fun getting to talk about this stuff with you two. It's literally because we love this hobby. This is what we live for.
Likewise, Kelsey, you literally are a gem in this hobby. Like it, I feel so grateful to know you. Like I really do. Just to be slightly in your orbit. I feel so glad.
We're all just, I guess, aping each other's stuff that we do here because like I wouldn't be what I literally wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if not for your guys' influence on me.
Not true.
Maybe it is.
You were a remarkable lady long before Joe and I showed up. Long before.
No, we all build each other up. We really do. And I don't know if people from the outside necessarily get to see that the way that we all do, but to be able to talk like this kind of demonstrates it.
Right.
Well, the success of my adventures that I've put out, those are largely because like I totally aped your adventures. I was like, these are set up so amazingly.
Likewise.
I'm gonna use the. I think I even sent you a message, Kelsey. I'm stealing your adventure format. I mean, it wasn't exact, but it was like that thing. Like, here's brief description. Here's the salient points.
Well, I mean, but Hank uses it too. You know, I tried to use it in Altered State. Like, you know, it works. It works. Well, guys, any final thoughts just to wrap this up on anything that we've talked about today?
Oh boy!
Gosh, how can we even conclude such a long convo? Yeah,
dropped a big bomb.
That's a lot of bouncing.
Well,
I think maybe a core point is from what we've talked about is like, you know, do not let the things in the game happen naturally and with trust, whether we're going all the way back to using roll tables to generate encounters, like and letting your group develop their character ideas together. It's kind of like letting the natural joy from this game emerge to surprise yourself, not only as a player, but as a DM, and not knowing what's going to happen. Like, that's why we play. And it's a running theme throughout everything we've talked about, I think.
I agree.
Yeah. Play to find out.
Wow, that's a great soundbite. I think we need to quit. We don't want to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Or snatch defeat from the jaws of victory here. So, I'm a knuckle dragger. Anyway, let's leave the listeners wanting a little bit more. We're going to end here. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Yes.
Kelsey, you're amazing, guys. Please check her out on all her social media. Go to the Arcane Library website. Grab some of her stuff. You will not regret it. She's amazing. She is probably one of the most talented and impressive adventure writers out there in the RPG scene. Yes. So please support her. And with that, Joe, take us to the outro.
Right. So I guess all that's really left to say, thank you again, Kelsey, is it's dangerous to go alone. So take my hero coin and roll ultimate effort.
See you guys.